This is Steve Young for the Co-Roundtable. I'd just like to raise a concern I have, which is a global trend, but it's particularly applicable in the United States, which is, loosely speaking, the government creation of money through debt spending and through the operation of central banks. That the numbers of dollars or currency units, which have been created in the last 10 years since the collapse of credit markets in 2008, is a staggering amount of money. It's in the trillions. 7 trillion here. I think the total amount in quantitative easing and other things is maybe 20 trillion over a decade. In the United States, because of the pandemic, and of course other countries have done the same thing, I think the Trump administration put in mass is almost $1 trillion, and then there's deficit spending on top of that. That was last year, 2020. And the Biden administration has just put in 1.9 trillion in deficit financing, and which has to be monetized by the Federal Reserve, the central bank, and they're talking about another 2 trillion. So we've had trillions of dollars of liquidity, of money, of cash flowing into the economy. With what effect? Now, my concern is if you look at other trends, like the prices of financial assets, they just keep going up and up and up with really no anchor in the real economy. So companies don't necessarily make that much more money, the economies don't necessarily grow that fast, but financial assets just keep growing. In the last month in the United States, the Dow Jones and the NASDAQ have reached record highs. Based on what? Speculations on the future. But another factor which people learned about during the Great Depression in the 1930s and now is that society as a whole, rich, middle, and low, have kind of a maximum limit on any day of how much they can actually spend on commodities. And roughly speaking, the rich people have a lot of money left over. Let's say they spend 3 times as much as the average family on food, and they add some wine and some brandy after dinner for the gentleman. They still are not going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on that. And they already have 1 house or 2 houses or 1 yacht or 2 yachts. And at some point you kind of run out of what you can spend on. What do you do with your excess money? Now, these people get their money because they're kind of, they live high on the hog. Middle class people, lower class people basically have to spend all their money on food, on rent, on transportation, on education, the kids and everything. And that money comes from the poor families and the middle class families, and it rises up through companies and one thing and another, and ends up in the pockets of the well-to-do. The well-to-do have so much money, they put most of it in financial assets. If you look at the percentage ownership of financial assets, the top 1% and the top 10% have the largest amount of asset ownership in financial assets. Poor people basically, roughly, have 0. Middle class have something like 3% of total financial assets, or some very, very small number. So what's happening actually is the more money that gets put into the economy by the government, this is true around the world, ends up helping the richest, the 1% and the top percent. Is there any evidence for this? Well, there were reports this week, we're in mid-April, of the first quarter result of big banks, Wall Street banks and others. And guess what? They had blockbuster results. Why did they have blockbuster results? Because trading was all high. Everybody was, all the wealthy people and all the money in funds and things were rushing into the markets to buy and sell and try to make a little profit here and that. And then there were public offerings because there's so much money around. New companies can go sell their stock, not based on past earnings, but on future prospects, and people will put billions in there, and some investment bank is going to make a fee. So do we have to worry, just as sort of ordinary people concerned for the moral outcomes of our economy, that too much government money injected into the economy helps some, but not most? A related point is, which people are now starting to look at, cryptocurrencies, which frankly I don't understand very much. They're not regulated by governments, but they are money equivalents. So you not only have the trillions of dollars created by governments, we're now having lots of other money created by people outside of markets, but it functions as money. And is this cryptocurrency in and of itself also going to contribute to having the rich get richer and the poor staying poor?